Rob's Child here. Welcome to Chapter 8 of Security Analysis. Nothing I say is investment advice, and I do not intend to replace the contents of this book, nor do I have the ability to, but I intend to supplement it and open a discussion, hopefully in the comment section below. So Chapter 8 did not cover what I was hoping it would do, to kind of give us some formulas as far as what he's been talking about thus far regarding what makes a bond safe enough. We end up concluding at the end of the chapter that it has mostly to do with size, and we'll get to that when we get to it. Let's start from the beginning. So most of this chapter is discussing specifically the New York statute for general criteria that bonds must have in order to be considered for purchase by saving bank investments. And so, I think the idea here is if you put your money in a savings bank, you want to make sure your bank is using the money properly to make themselves money and not have any risk. And I mean, that's what all of this has been about. How do I have safety? Funny enough, we just recently had, 2007, we have a major financial crisis going on, and just recently we have all these mid-level banks blowing up, not because of the safety of bonds, but because of the loss of capital value of the treasury bonds because of yields going up and, simply not having enough of a cushion to be able to survive something like that happening. What a disaster that has been. Although somehow we are able to magically sweep problems under the rug. So anyway, he's using these New York statutes as he mentions that they are arbitrary, but however, they're a good point of departure. It opens up the conversation. So there's these 7 criteria, and he kind of just goes through each one of them and talks about the good intentions and the problems with each one of those and how a lot of them are not so appropriate. And something I wanted to mention in the last chapter that I didn't mention in my updated 7th chapter is the industrial bond element. So there was one important conclusion for that time. I don't even know how much it applies to today, but he did mention that, size is very important to consider when we're considering industrial bonds. So, that ends up being the end argument of this whole chapter, that it's all about size in the end. But before we get to that point, most of this chapter is about making fun of these New York statutes and how they're decent ideas, like I said, but they don't really work. And then there's a section that goes on talking about foreign bonds and, do they have risk? Do you have safety in foreign bonds? And he says basically no. This was close to the period of World War II. Rather, this edition was during World War II. It was written. And so there's obviously a good amount of bias against foreigners as the world is fighting each other. But he basically makes the argument. I don't know how true this holds today. It probably doesn't. I mean, a lot of things in finance have changed, obviously, since this book was written. But no matter, the book talks about, well, okay, so maybe at a huge discount, government bonds, foreign government bonds might be okay. But he says, they're not really safe. You have no legal right in another country. Like, why would you want to take that risk? And then he says, actually foreign corporate bonds might be a better place for you to be, because you can have a government become insolvent as for paying, I believe he's talking about dollar denominated bonds, back to whoever owns the debt. And at the same time, you can have corporations in that same country that don't have that kind of problem, which is kind of funny. I think the United States right now actually has a lower credit rating itself, even though it can print money, than some of our top corporations. So it's funny how that can work out. But anyway, at the end of all this, the idea here is that foreign corporate bonds, even though they have in theory less default risk, they still have the political risk. They still have the risk of being in the country that perhaps needs those dollars and can just take them. And so he's very cautious. He's just against foreign bonds as a place of fixed investment securities. And again, we're strictly talking about buying at par value, not at a discount. So another part of these New York statutes is they come up with apparently a list of rules of minimum requirements for the size of a municipality, for those to be considered investment grade bonds for a savings bank to use as collateral against your account. And that's what we're talking about here apparently for all of this. The most pristine collateral. So it has to have, municipality has, if it's a muni bond, has to have a certain size. If it's a railroad, it has to have a certain number of miles. And, for whatever company, it has to be a certain amount of bonds. They're not going to let them borrow less. So they have to borrow a certain amount. And he basically goes through this list and points out all of the problems with it. He says, okay, it's a good idea to consider size, because size does matter as far as security goes, with the safety of fixed income investments. However, he disagrees with a lot of the points and comes up with kind of alternate ideas. And I think it's important to say that, so all these ideas that he has, they're so old, the numbers, they have very little relevance to today. I'm not going to try to calculate what this would mean in today's money. Plus, all of our industries are different. So, I think the biggest takeaway here in the chapter is, again, safety. It's all about safety. And he says when it comes to investment grade bonds that pretty much no default risk, as in so small that you don't have to worry about it, I guess. And at the end of this, size matters. Even though you can have a smaller company that can theoretically be more creditworthy than a large one, generally speaking, it's the best way to lower your risk for this area. And, to finish up the chapter, of course, he has to mention that the whole thing's a moot point in a way, because just because it's large, it doesn't have an absolute guarantee of safety. And that's Chapter 8. Hope you enjoyed. Please discuss any of the topics in the comment section below. Thank you. Rob's Child.